Pat Riley has spoken. There was some frustration in Riley's comments to media today on the team's performance this past season, making players available for more games, Jimmy Butler's contract extension, and a big change coming this offseason. We get into all of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor-in-chief of allyoucanheat.com. Joining me as always, David Ramil, Miami Heat credentialed media member. However you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Recording this from Kaseya Center after Pat Riley's annual offseason press conference. Just a ton of stuff to get into, including some hints about his plans for the roster this summer. But we have to start with the most explosive quote of the afternoon, David. When asked about Jimmy Butler's comments that he made over the weekend, that if Jimmy Butler were playing, that the Celtics and the Knicks would be at home, Pat Riley said that if you're not on the court playing against the Boston Celtics or against the New York Knicks, you should keep your mouth shut. And don't take our word for it. Take Pat Riley's word for it here.
For him, I thought, is that Jimmy trolling or is that Jimmy serious? If you're not on the court playing against Boston or on the court playing against the New York Knicks, you should keep your mouth shut. And your criticism of those teams.
There you have it. Keep your mouth shut. Big words from Pat Riley. What do you make of it?
It's a lot to get to. It's a lot to kind of try and understand here. And I don't think Riley expected to make these kind of inflammatory comments or to have them received the way they have, because already, even as we were just getting started to record it, the press conference ended just minutes ago. Already, every aggregating site on the planet has already picked up on the comment and just distributed it. And everybody's wondering right now if there's going to be some kind of fallout with Jimmy Butler, if there's going to be an erosion of the relationship between the front office and Jimmy. I'm not sure, because there was some context there, and Riley kind of talking about the idea that, is Jimmy trolling or not? And, at the same time, he had made a very consistent theme throughout the press conference that players should be made available, players should play and do whatever they can to be on the court more frequently. And Jimmy Butler, not on the court, made these comments in a perhaps intoxicated moment to a reporter that's been gone viral over the last couple of days. I can't recall exactly what event he was at. I
think this was it was either at Formula One or the Inter Miami game, because that's basically what he was doing over the weekend.
One of those things, an event that Jimmy was at. He was asked by a reporter, and Jimmy had the comment to say that if he was out there, Boston would be home. And Riley's response, it doesn't sound like it was well received. So I'm not sure how to read into whether or not it's as inflammatory as it sounds. But on the surface level, it sounds pretty terrible.
It's inflammatory. There's no doubt about it. And we could talk about the motivation behind it, what this ultimately means for the Heat and Jimmy Butler's relationship, but there's no way Jimmy Butler hears this and is stoked about it. There's no version of this where Jimmy Butler doesn't think a little bit like, you know what? F you, like a little bit, right? At the very least.
And he always talks so respectfully about Pat. Coach Pat does this, Coach Pat says that.
They're very much cut from the same cloth, and it's why Jimmy Butler is fit here in Miami better than he fit in Chicago or Minnesota or even Philadelphia.
Right.
But we have seen this in the past where the culture almost gets too culture-y, and you just get a little over-seasoned, and you just, the culture's just in the oven too long, and it's just overdone. And sometimes it happens, and it has pushed greater players away, arguably. And I don't know if that's what this is going to come to, but I read that quote when we're sitting there at the press conference, and I hear that, and I'm like, oh, Pat is frustrated.
Yeah.
And that to me was everything here. He had already gone through probably 20 minutes or no, it was a little bit longer than that, of the press conference, and in every single opportunity he had, he brought up player availability. And it doesn't take much thought to think of who is he talking about.
Right.
Because it's one thing if Haywood Highsmith misses like the first month of the season because of a hamstring injury. No, nothing against Haywood. It's not that big of a deal.
Right.
It's a much bigger deal when your star player is available for the fewest amount of games he's ever been available for in a Heat jersey. And even when he is available, is not making the same impact because perhaps he's saving himself for games that may never happen, and in this case did never happen. Yeah. And he mentioned even before that, a year ago, he had a conversation with Jimmy Butler and Bernie Lee, his agent, about, hey, we need you to be more available. We need you to have a greater impact. And this was after the Heat made it to the NBA Finals, but they did it via play-in tournament. They were a quarter away from being knocked out by the Bulls in that play-in tournament, and Pat Riley in the front office sat down with Jimmy and Bernie Lee and said, we can't risk it again. We can't do that again. It was a cool story, but we're not about that. We're not about the play-in tournament life. And we need you available. And I guess from what we understand just from Pat Riley's press conference just now is that they agreed or something. They came to some kind of agreement afterwards, and then that didn't happen this regular season. And Jimmy Butler missed a lot of time for personal time, for minor injuries. I think he missed the third game of the season for rest. Yes. It was a lot of that over the course of the year, and I think that all of that built up, and ultimately not getting a chance to see whether or not Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat could have sent Boston or New York or any of these other teams in the Eastern Conference home. It all sort of crescendos into a moment responding to a pretty innocuous question about Jimmy Butler kind of trolling other teams in the media, and Pat Riley, being the old school guy he is like, well, at least their stars play, because you don't. Jalen Brunson plays. Jason Tatum plays. Jaylen Brown plays. Yeah. Jimmy Butler did not play.
You're right. It was a kind of innocuous question. It was asked, and Riley could have just said, "Oh, we love that kind of attitude. We love that kind of spirit. That's the belief that Jimmy possesses." No, he didn't go that route. He said, basically, you put up or shut up, and you weren't out there to prove anything otherwise, so you don't really have the right to speak on this. Kind of interesting a take from him, but you're right that it all ties into everything that he had mentioned throughout the whole press conference. The idea that players were not available, that Jimmy wasn't available, that Tyler wasn't available. He even mentioned Jaime's injury, but at the end of the playoff run, basically. But he also mentioned that he missed games due to a hip injury that kind of took his rhythm out of it, and still under his breath. And the follow-up statement was like, but he still played 75 games for the team. So a kind of complimentary of some players, not as complimentary as other players. And that's to be expected. Like, you're Jimmy Butler. Like, he was complimenting Jimmy Butler. I know this is a big takeaway from everything. Everybody's already, like I said before, the rounds have already been made. Everybody's taking his comment. Context be damned. And I don't know that there is much context to it. I think he was trying to light a fire under Jimmy's ass. Having said all that, he was also very complimentary of Jimmy as the best player on the team, as the guy who can still carry this team to contention.
Still be the best player on a title-winning team.
But
When he's available.
But you got to be out there.
And that's what it was so striking to me. He was asked about everything. I could have asked Pat Riley, what did he have for lunch? And he said, I had a turkey sandwich. It would have been better if everybody was available.
My waiter was available to bring it to me.
Right. Yeah. Like, it was just like, I had a turkey. He could have been asked about any, and he was in every single answer.
Yep.
He brought up player availability. And this also reflects what Eric Spoelstra was talking about in his exit interview on Friday. He was talking about, we need to get back in here and see what we can do differently. And I don't know. I am not a doctor. I don't pretend to be one. Well, if there's something that the Heat can do and their players can do to make going on 35-year-old Jimmy Butler more available than he has been over the last couple of years, I don't know that there is something that you can do. I don't know that there is something that you can do to keep Tyler Hero over the last 2 years from breaking his hand when diving for a loose ball or overextending his knee when hustling on a play in transition in New Orleans. I don't know that there's something that you can do in that to improve the overall availability, but he was talking about changes to their approach. Right. Basically, Jimmy Butler's like, no, it's not the fact that you are getting the injuries in terms of Jimmy Butler. It's playing through them. It's giving us more in the regular season.
Well, he also made a differentiation between real injuries or players that are injured, and that he's never been the type of person to ask a player to fight through injury like that. But at the same time, that there's things that you could do differently in response to the injuries, or things that lead up to these injuries in the first place that you can avoid. And one of the things that he talked about that I think stood out to me was this idea of not only internal improvement, but also getting more well-coordinated with off-season training regimens and everything else like that. And I'm not sure, we see a lot of Jimmy posting videos in tribute to his friend and off-season trainer, Chris Brickley, and I don't know, again, if this is another dig necessarily at Jimmy, but this idea that whatever you're doing in the offseason, not just Jimmy, but everybody in this team, whatever you guys are doing in the offseason doesn't necessarily mesh with what we think we should be doing as a team and our training
Potentially,
approach.
right? It's and I think that's what him and Spo mean about like
Changes.
we're going to evaluate everything.
Right.
And maybe that's part of the evaluation is, hey, maybe that individual stuff doesn't work. Or maybe they look at it and they say, you know what, it does work, but we need to all be on the same page in terms
Right.
of what we're trying to accomplish. Or maybe nothing needs to change. I don't know, but I know that, and that's sort of where my big question is the internal belief really that the players could just be made to be more available? Or is there a point where you get with a roster that has been so plagued by injury that it's almost maybe something with the roster is flawed and that needs to change? And I think that the Heat are going to do both things, right? It's going to be, there are going to be some changes, whether or not they're minor or major. There's definitely going to be some changes to the roster. But if Jimmy Butler is on this roster next year, his approach is going to have to change. That at least is the message from Pat Riley. We could talk about Tyler Hero's future, Haywood Highsmith, Caleb Martin, who are free agents, like all these guys. Those things are, in the grand scheme of things, minor pieces. And maybe there are like individual tweaks that they can make to become more available or healthier or whatever it might be. But Jimmy Butler, if he's going to be on the roster, they just simply need more. And that ties into the extension conversation as well, which was another big point that came up in today's press conference. We'll talk about what Pat Riley said about Jimmy Butler's contract extension next. We'll dig into a lot more stuff from the annual press conference after this.
You know, one of the things that Pat Riley mentioned in that kind of overall analysis of the front office is, you know, what are we doing in terms of how players eat, how they train, and mental health? Like, it was interesting. I don't think I've ever heard Riley refer to mental health as a factor in how players perform over the course of a regular season, but makes sense. Look, everybody sometimes has the need to get something off their chest, whether you're a person working your 9-to-5 job or an NBA player. Stress can get to you. You've got a topic that you want to talk about. Maybe you don't have somebody that you can address those kinds of issues with. You know, you might need somebody that's got an unbiased perspective on those issues that are affecting you. And if that's the case, maybe you might want to try therapy. And if that's the case, then give BetterHelp a try, because I think BetterHelp is a great resource for people who are looking to try therapy. Maybe you've never tried therapy before and you're kind of curious about it. You just go online, fill out a simple questionnaire, and they'll match you up to a licensed therapist. It's all online and entirely suited to your schedule, whatever's most convenient for you. If your schedule changes for whatever reason, you make a quick change, and it's that easy through BetterHelp.com. So go visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA right now and get a 10% discount on your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Over on the YouTube channel, we did post the entirety of the Pat Riley press conference, so if you want to hear it all, you can check it out there within our selection of videos. Also, make sure you leave a 5-star rating review on the podcast app. All of that support is greatly appreciated. Jimmy Butler missed 2 games late in the season. He missed the game against the Golden State Warriors that the Heat lost by 21 points, that blowout, and he lost a game, back-to-back games in Detroit and in Philadelphia. Now, the Heat won the game in Detroit, but they lost that game to the Sixers by 7 points. Had Jimmy been available for even one of those games, and the Heat win one of those games,
Might have avoided the play.
then maybe you avoid the play-in tournament and all these things. And so I don't know how many more games the Heat necessarily need from Jimmy Butler. I just know that 60 is not enough, and that seems to be what Pat Riley is saying. And he kind of went out about, like, you know, the NBA player rule, now 65 games is a minimum. You're almost giving players an excuse to miss that much time. It's like the minimum is 65. He's like, well, no, the maximum is 82. He's like, I'd be happy with a player playing 72 games. And that's 12 more games than Jimmy Butler played this year. So I think that ideally, Pat Riley would have Jimmy Butler come back next year and play 72 games with a little bit of an upgraded roster potentially.
Yeah.
And so maybe that happens. Maybe it doesn't. But before any of that happens, Jimmy Butler has a contract extension available, or is eligible for a contract extension. Now, Pat Riley talked about this.
He did.
And he was asked point blank. Ira Winterman from the Sun Sentinel asked him about 3 or 4 different times about it. And it was great reporting work, and somebody had to ask it. And basically laid it out. If Jimmy Butler comes to the front office and says, I want the 2-year maximum extension, are you guys prepared to give it to him? And Pat Riley said that they had not had those conversations internally seriously yet, but that they have two options if that were to happen. They either accept or they wait until next year. And I think the middle option that Pat Riley is leaving out there is or enter into negotiations with Jimmy Butler and maybe come to an extension agreement that's something below the max that would pay him upwards of $58 million 3 years from now. So, in general, it's the point being is it's up to Jimmy Butler right now to go to the front office and ask for that extension. And
Absolutely.
It's been reported, and as we understand it, Jimmy Butler is going to ask for that 2-year maximum extension. And it sounds to me,
Maybe
and
not
correct me if
now.
I'm wrong.
Maybe
Well, maybe
not.
not now, right? That is a great point. We should talk about that. But right now, it does not sound like the Heat want to go through that extension because Pat Riley also mentioned we don't have to do it now. We can wait until next year to do it.
That was my big takeaway with that is we don't have to address these things until we do, and now is not that time because we still have 2 years. He said it specifically, he's still under contract for 2 more years. And if that's the case, he's got that player option, fine, whatever. When they bring it up to us, then we have to make a decision. But up until that point, it's not really something we've considered. I don't necessarily buy that. I think it's definitely a concern, and it definitely should be from the front office perspective. I mean, that's how you prepare as a front office is knowing that these kind of time frame is playing out. And, and you have to prepare for it. At the same time, maybe they're not going to force their issue. Maybe they don't want to show their hand publicly or anything like that. But given how open Riley was about everything else during the course of the press conference, I'm not sure whether or not that's the case. So it was interesting that
their preference, I think, would be to wait the year.
Absolutely.
I think that's my biggest takeaway. Do you mind if I just read the quote really quick?
Go for it.
I have it here. So he goes, if he being Jimmy Butler, if he requests, we can either accept or say we're going to think about it. We have not made a decision on it. I think we make too much out of this. He still has 2 years left on it.
Right.
I'm going to tell you who's going to make a lot out of it is Jimmy Butler.
Absolutely.
If he doesn't get it. Because while it makes a ton of sense, why would the Heat want to do this right now? There's no way. You're under contract for 2 more years. I know it's the player option for $56 million or whatever it is. I'm going to go ahead and break this news now. If Jimmy Butler does not get an extension, he's accepting that player option because he's not making more than that as a free agent. So it's in the Heat's mind, it's, we got him under contract for 2 more years. We would rather just let him play this out because also we don't know how available this guy is going to be.
I think, that's it too.
But Jimmy Butler is at the point of, hey, I'm going to be 35 by the time next year starts. I don't want to wait another year where I'm going into my age 36 season to start negotiating a contract extension because I might not be more available. Because I'm old.
This is a game of chicken playing out in real time here between a person who makes drunken comments at a public event in Miami and Pat Riley.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton.
His measured statement here at the end of the year press conference. It's very interesting to see it. I think that's a good point, because they're not under any obligation to do so. And I think that's the rational take also. It's like, you know what? We've had a problem with you this year. You weren't available. It's okay to say that idea that, I'm going to take some time off because I am going to incur injuries, but I am going to be able to carry you through the postseason. There's some validity to it in terms of last year. It's not the desired approach from the Heat front office, though. And as you're going to go and request more money, well, guess what? You're going to have to earn a little bit, and that's
and
by
where's the
playing
trust
more
level
regularly.
right now? If this conversation between Jimmy Butler and Bernie Lee in the front office happened a year ago, talking about we need you to be more available and we need you to be a little bit more forthright when with your injury status and your availability and all these things.
There's fractions right now. This relationship between the two. Is that going too far?
I know. I think it's fair. I think there has to be.
There has to be tension at the
there's a
very least.
we could sit here and be like, there's a fraction between Jimmy Butler and the Heat front office, and that can get picked up and aggregated, and then whatever. But I think there's some truth to maybe the relationship isn't as whole as we want it to be.
Frustration.
Yeah,
certainly.
some frustrations. I think Pat Riley basically gave voice to those frustrations in today's press conference, and I do wonder how that influences any contract negotiations if Bernie Lee and Jimmy Butler show up in his office and say, we want the max 2-year extension, and Pat Riley will say, well, I need you to be more available and play more games, and then Jimmy Butler says, I got you, coach. I'll do that for you. Pat Riley could say, well, you told me that last summer, and you didn't do it.
Yeah.
And so there has to be some sort of strain on that relationship right now. And I think that by Pat Riley sort of saying you should shut your mouth, is that frustration just boiling over and bubbling out in a press conference? And so, I think this is meaningful. It's going to get, you mentioned it's already aggregated. It's got picked up for good reason. You don't hear stuff like this very much, even from Pat Riley. You don't hear stuff like this. Like this is very much like, do you have the guts kind of thing.
Exactly, yeah. It's a public call out after a frustrating loss, et cetera, and a pivotal point. And we all know how that played out. Like, again, you pointed out, we were talking about it beforehand, like questioning LeBron, specifically whether or not he has the guts, wasn't what drove him out of Miami, but it certainly doesn't help either.
Right.
So Jimmy has to go into, I mean, he's got to be overhearing this, and he's going to want his money. And at the same time, now he's hearing Pat, who's always been very deferential to, question whether or not he's got the guts, basically, or whether or not I should shut up and things of that sort. I don't know how Jimmy's going to take it. Like you and I were debating it. Does Jimmy seem like the type of person who will take that? And I know some people are responding to it this way, that he's going to handle that and be like, oh, okay, you're challenging me. I appreciate that you call me out. I appreciate that you push me further that way. The way UD has, the way Spo has, the way maybe Tibbs has in other relationships. Jimmy operates this way. He kind of takes the naysayers and uses that to fuel them, as a lot of NBA players do. At the same time, does this seem like a public call-out? Now, and I offered this, and I don't know how realistic this might be. This might be...
Okay, I think you're getting to your theory?
Yes.
All right, 1 second here, because it's such a great point, and I want to give us some room here, and we're running up against a break here. But before that, I would hear the public call-out as a motivating tool, right? Going with the stick over the carrot, because the carrot just didn't work for the last couple of years. I would understand that potentially as a reason of why Pat Riley did this. We were sitting in that press conference. This to me did not sound calculated. No. This felt like frustration.
He was pissed.
And that's it.
Yeah.
It was like 6 times asked about Jimmy Butler, and all good, like legitimate questions.
Yeah.
And this was a question even barely about Jimmy Butler's availability, like not about Jimmy's availability, not about Jimmy's contract extension, kind of a softball.
Yeah.
And then this is when it kind of
see the drunken comment from Jimmy
right.
about Boston. He's like, "Well, shut the hell up," basically.
Right.
I don't.
And so, but there was no exit interview with Jimmy Butler done on Friday, and nor was there with Bam Adebayo, and so that in and of itself is not a thing.
Right.
But if the one thing about this Heat organization is they'll call you out publicly, but they're not going to tell reporters anything that they haven't told you themselves. And
that's fair.
If Jimmy Butler and Pat Riley had that conversation on Friday, and then Pat Riley said it again to the press on whatever today is, Monday, then I don't think Jimmy Butler would care very much about that. But because they didn't have that conversation, and because the last time that we're, I guess, supposed to know, the last time they had a conversation about anything like this was last summer.
A year ago, yeah.
Then I'm going to assume that when this lands in Jimmy Butler's algorithm, that this is going to be news to him. And not
well received.
And not well received, which gets us to your theory. We'll talk about that next year on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by DoorDash. You want to make mom smile? Who doesn't? You love your mom. Everyone wants to get them something nice for Mother's Day. Well, you can start Mother's Day off with some flowers, or you can surprise her with gifts from the brands that she loves, delivered the very same day with DoorDash. Moms are special. Moms are a gift to you. So give her the gift to show how much you care on Mother's Day. Right now, you can pair flowers with a gift card so she can celebrate any way she wants. Is she a bookworm? Try a bookstore gift card. Does she love a good latte? Get her a gift card to her favorite coffee shop. You can't go wrong. I'm sorry?
Big face?
Big.
As long as it's still in Miami?
Yes.
Until they open up a location in Philadelphia?
Support Jimmy Butler because he's definitely struggling.
He might not get the max extension, so
support him while you can.
Throw him $40 for coffee.
Get a Mother's Day gift as unique as she is with DoorDash. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get 50% off your next order up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flour, convenience, grocery, or retail order now on DoorDash. That's LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONBA. Order using DoorDash today. Terms do apply.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. As a reminder, you can catch the full Pat Riley press conference on our YouTube page. We are still going strong 5 days a week, talking all things Miami Heat offseason. It just feels like we are going to keep talking about this Pat Riley press conference because there was a lot to get into here. Before we get into some of the other news and notes, big takeaways that we had from this one, your theory.
Well, look, I think this is a front office that's clearly a little hamstrung and handcuffed in terms of what flexibility they have and what moves they could potentially make. You know that this contract extension is looming in some way, and we're not sure that you can get Jimmy out on the floor more regularly than he already does. Having said all that, what if this is just an opportunity to kind of force Jimmy's hand a little bit and make him request a trade that he might not want to go through in the first place by pissing him off via these public statements? What if he's making a comment like this, knowing that Jimmy's going to take it badly, and eventually he's going to make a stink, as he has in Philadelphia, as he has in Minnesota, and as he has in Chicago, presumably all for the same reasoning, which is a contract extension. And you can't burn that bridge necessarily if you're Miami, because you've already had a problem with players like that in the past.
Right.
But if Jimmy's the one making a stink, well, this is just Jimmy being Jimmy.
This is what they learned from the Dwayne Wade mishandling of that situation was, well, we can't be the bad guys of losing a beloved hometown hero. But if that hometown hero decides that he no longer wants to be here, then that's not our fault.
Our hands are tied, yeah.
Then our hands are tied, and we just mean the best for the organization. Look, the guy barely plays. We're trying to build a roster. He's saying dumb things in front of cameras at Inter Miami games or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, it's a great theory. I love it as a theory. I don't know that the chess, not checkers thing holds up here.
Because it did seem so...
Because it just seems so off the cuff.
It did. Exactly right.
But I will tell you this. It might have that impact. It could certainly have that impact.
Unexpected get out of jail free card.
I don't expect that to happen, and I don't expect this to land well with Jimmy Butler. I don't expect it to land well with Bernie Lee, whose conversation with Pat Riley a year ago came to light without, any questions specifically about it, and Pat Riley was quick to just kind of throw him under the bus and say, like, look, I need better from him, and I need better from his agent, and I need better from all these people involved, and I felt lied to, essentially. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially that's what it boils down to what he said. And who knows? Like, that is going to have to be addressed, no? During a contract negotiation, if and when that happens. Or it might not even get to that point. I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but it could certainly be the case where your theory does almost play out here. Even if it wasn't chestnut checkers, it could be like, you know what? Screw them. We can get this money from Philly. We can go get this money from somewhere else. And they're not going to have all these stipulations about me having to play basketball games. And maybe that's where we get to. I don't know. You and I have been talking about this a lot, how the Heat were not going to be able to pay him the max anyway. We already knew that. Yeah. This press conference did not change that. But it added a little bit of fire to something that was going to be spicy already. And I'm very interested to see how that plays out. But
and we should point out, normally these press conferences don't reveal very much. It's a lot of kind of nothing burger being said. Like, he's very, very measured in his response. But I think the frustration of this season, the frustration with the series against Boston, and Jimmy's lack of availability throughout the course of the season, and specifically in the playoffs, I think it just boiled over there. And I think that's what he was basically he was pissed off.
He was asked, hear it. He was asked, though, specifically, are you consider trading Jimmy Butler? And he said no. So he did say that. And he did say Jimmy Butler is still the number one guy.
The question, however, was it phrased a little different? Like, if you can't move any of the non-Jimmy, non-Bam assets, I think it was Barry who asked him
would
that.
you consider maybe taking a step back and trading Jimmy Butler? It was almost like that. And I think, and yeah, you're right, because then Pat Riley started talking about how they don't really want to go through years of being in the lottery again and all these things.
We don't rebuild.
And so can I ask you something?
Yeah.
If you traded Jimmy for picks and stuff that you could use
to acquire star,
to get Donovan Mitchell,
right?
Is that a step back? Because that doesn't feel to me. Maybe your ceiling isn't quite where it was when Jimmy was at his prime. But if the front office has come to the conclusion that Jimmy Butler, that prime Jimmy Butler, he's not that guy anymore.
We've gone as far as we could.
And I mean, if you just put Donovan Mitchell on this team this year, they're still at worst a play-in team. They're not worse than they were last year, because at least Donovan Mitchell does. He was hurt this year, but he's mostly a durable player. He had a couple freak injuries, and he's been dealing with this knee thing for the entire postseason now. But generally speaking, he's younger, more available than Jimmy Butler is. I don't think that this team is worse than the play-in team.
No.
So I don't think that you could consider that a step back necessarily.
No, I think it kind of resets, again, the timeline now, where you can start moving forward with perhaps Mitchell and Bam as your core, as younger players, and that kind of opens things up a little bit. I don't know. It's an interesting idea. He did speak about other players as well. The whole press conference was not necessarily just about Jimmy Butler, but I think he spoke well of Bam Adebayo, as no concerns regarding the contract extension that he will be eligible for next season, or next offseason, we should say. But at the same time, he mentioned the leap that he's taken. He mentioned the leap that Jaime Jaquez and Nikola Jovic have taken. He mentioned Tyler's injuries, and he was a little bit more, again, I think a little bit more flexible in his analysis of Tyler's availability or lack thereof. Because you know what? At the end of the day, Tyler was there for the playoffs.
And he said, he said, he only played 40-something games, but those were real injuries. I mean, if that's...
He also called him a little fragile.
That is as close to Pat Riley getting to a subtweet as there is. Like that...
He also called him a little fragile.
But then followed it up. He said he's a little fragile, but nobody works harder. Maybe we have to change his caloric intake, all these things, like whatever it is. But that seems like a real conversation like that he would be willing to have with Tyler Hero and that
my
group.
takeaway from that is, look, we see Tyler is missing games, but we know why he's missing games, and because he's hurt and he's not available. And yeah, he might be limited as a player, et cetera, whatever, but those are things that he can continue to improve on, or at least he can continue to be the player that he's been up to this point in Miami. With Jimmy, we know that he's capable of doing more, and he's not playing games, and he's missing some of these games, and probably not just because of injury, because of I just don't feel like playing, which is not acceptable to this front office and this organization.
A couple more notes on the other players that he talked about before we get out of here. One last thing on Tyler Hero, non-committal about whether or not Tyler Hero is best as a sixth man or not. Kind of took it to Udonis Haslem for going on first take a little bit. That was more of a lighthearted part. I don't know if those quotes are making the rounds or not. I didn't strike me as Pat Riley being like viscerally angry with Udonis Haslem, more than just like casually annoyed.
He's not telling UD to shut the hell up.
That's true. Yes. So, but non-committal on Tyler Hero being a sixth man, but did say that potentially that's going to be up to Eric Spoelstra, but potentially in the future that Spo might have to ask Tyler Hero or Terry Rozier to take on that six-man role. I found that interesting that he kind of opened that door a little bit. On Terry Rozier, I asked Pat Riley if there was concerns about his neck injury long-term. He said that doctors convinced us and him that this will heal and go away. He also was it seemed like he was really encouraged by what he did see from Terry Rozier. He said when he was asked exactly what his reputation is, scary Terry, it was all right there. So that was interesting.
I think he believes in Terry and what his contributions would have been had he been available. To the point where I think also a takeaway is that I think he was happy with this roster and expected it to be better. They didn't have the bodies available at the end there. And I think that's on Jimmy. I mean, I can't say so far as that they're going to run it back next season, but I wouldn't be necessarily surprised either if there's some kind of an understanding, a mutual understanding between Jimmy Butler and Pat Riley.
Part of that, too, is I asked him about the trimming payroll because this team is up against the second tax. And that's just not a conceivable place to be, and that has nothing to do with what Mickey Harrison is willing or not willing to pay. It's just all the roster punishments that come with being a second tax team, all the constraints. I mean, Pat Riley talked again, it feels like this comes up every year, about how they were able to add Shane Battier and Ray Allen to the Big Three, and that would not, you couldn't do that if you did the Big Three this year, because you wouldn't have those mid-level exceptions available to you as a second tax apron team, and those teams would have certainly been a second tax apron team. And so there would, instead of Shane Battier and instead of Mike Miller and instead of Ray Allen, it's just like it's Norris Cole and washed up Rashard Lewis in those spots instead of being like the 9th or 10th guys on the roster. You're talking about Norris Cole and washed up Rashard Lewis as the 6th or 7th guy on the roster.
Right.
That's the biggest problem. And so he's been consistent over the last couple of years about wanting to maintain depth and the ability to keep depth. So anyway, I asked him about trimming payroll. He says we're going to have to figure that out. So non-committal on that. But did mention how it's finding a balance between, like, if the team is worth paying that, then it's worth it. If it's not, then maybe you have to look at it. And I would say, based off of 2 years of being in the play-in tournament, probably not worth it. So either they get that major move that makes the payroll worth it, where they sort of redistribute that money to guys who are better or more available, then maybe that becomes worth it. If not, then maybe you do look at maybe some sort of cost-saving move. What that is, remains to be seen. Last thing, Pat Riley talking about Bam Adebayo. He was asked about Bam. I don't really remember what the question was necessarily, but starts talking about Magic Johnson and Magic deciding that he wanted to be more of a three-point shooter, and then goes so far and in a roundabout way then applies that to Bam Adebayo. And he says of Magic, he made the changes to become a greater shooter, then says, so Bam has to look at his game and sit with coach and how he can get better and expand his game. So I think, and not necessarily news because everybody's sort of been nudging Bam in this direction, maybe it's time for Bam to take more threes. And by the way, if that does happen, then what Udonis Haslem talked about on First Take that he got admonished by Pat Riley for doing, about maybe Bam moving over to the 4 and playing with a true 7-footer might be more of an option. But those are basically the rest of my notes and takeaways from this press conference. I think we pretty much hit everything. In terms of whether or not a major roster change is coming, Pat Riley doesn't know, just like he didn't know last time this year, but he did say he's going to be open to everything.
Yeah, if he said there was one positive thing about Udonis's comments is that he was going to be upset, he was going to be frustrated, and he was going to try to look to make improvements on this roster to some degree. Again, those improvements could be just internal changes, the way they approach things, making sure that they get players healthy and more available, not necessarily the kind of swing for the fences trades a lot of people are hoping for or expecting. I don't know. Unless something shakes up with Jimmy and his camp, I wouldn't expect that kind of major move necessarily. But I don't know. It seems like it's going to be a spicy offseason, and I think Pat Riley has certainly kicked it off in a bright way.
Talked about how he spent the last night of the regular season, or of the playoffs, sipping tequila, slept until noon the next day after his sleep meds wore off, and then woke up and started getting back to work. And that's a pretty good way to have ended last postseason, I think. And there's a lot of work for him, certainly, to do here. But for now, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. We'll be back with 3 more episodes this week. We're going to start getting into our exit interview series. I'm sure there's going to be more fallout from this press conference that we could talk about. Maybe Jimmy Butler responds. Who knows? Whatever happens, you know that we'll have reactions for you here on Locked On Heat.